Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Friday, March 15th. Happy birthday to my grandma and my aunt. Probably neither of those people will watch this, but that's okay. I'm going to say it to them anyways. So happy birthday to them. So I want to talk about three things today, maybe four real quick. So I want to talk about that. So I am in Western Wear. I'm out at Stampede Strategic Retreat this weekend. So I'm super excited to be here with Stampede Board and talking about what's next for Stampede. And it is a fruitful conversation so far. I'm really looking forward to continuing it over the weekend. And whoops, I'm losing phones as I'm making adjustments. Okay, so I want to talk about three things though, primarily today. So I want to talk about a briefing note that is on the council agenda next week around inclusive hiring for persons with intellectual disabilities. I want to just really quickly touch on the decision about the plebiscite notice of motion failure, and just put a couple quick comments to that. And then I really want to talk about citywide rezoning from the utilities perspective, and one of the key questions that we're getting around utility capacity. And this is all in lead up. So the rezoning and so the snippets I'm doing through 15-minute Fridays is really in the lead up to a bigger conversation that I'm going to be hosting on April 8th with two members of administration and myself to answer sort of those common questions as we lead into rezoning. And acknowledging that it is a complex conversation and there are a lot of feelings involved with it. So I'll touch on that a little bit today, and then have that ongoing conversation. Okay, so let's talk first about the briefing note that is on the council agenda for Tuesday about inclusive hiring. So I'm super, super thrilled that this is coming forward. I'm really delighted that we are removing barriers to hiring individuals with intellectual disabilities. So those are individuals who are like born. So people who may have Down syndrome, they may have had a birth defect and have them low IQ. So these are they may have had like an illness as a child, and so but these are individuals who are looking for meaningful looking for meaningful employment. So Inclusion Alberta approached me at the end. I'm trying to get my dates at the end of October in 2022 to bring this forward. And so I've been working on the back end with administration to try to move this forward, bringing the unions into the conversation to do this. And so through those ongoing conversations, the city is now going to be piloting. So sort of taking that first step. And when we say pilot, what I think we really mean, and these are the conversations I'm having going back and forth, is like we are taking those first steps to creating a framework to an inclusive hiring, and so that individuals with those intellectual disabilities can find themselves in positions with the city of Calgary, and to support the work that we do. And I think this is so critical important. We talk a lot about inclusion, diversity, and belonging, and so it's really about going beyond the words and going into practice to do these steps. And I also, when you have a workforce that is representative of the population, you make better decisions. And so what those individuals with intellectual disabilities, when they get hired on, they're going to share things with us about that employment opportunity that are going to make it better. And so for those first people, they're going to be trailblazers within the city, helping us to provide more inclusive hiring opportunities. And I think it will just overall make us as a city, like the city, like as a city, a better place, but also like us, the corporation, is a better place to do that inclusive hiring. So I'm really excited about that. I'm so glad we're taking these steps forward. So some of the data and stats are like 80% of individuals with intellectual disabilities are not employed. And these are people who want to give back. If you've met anyone, we just had Special Olympics. And so of course I went to a couple Special Olympics events. These are some of the most dedicated, cheerful, enthusiastic humans you will ever meet in your entire life. And for them to be able to bring that to the city, I'm very excited for it. So I'm so glad that's coming forward. And I know that there's going to be other disability serving organizations who want to work with us as well. And that's going to be fantastic too. So I'm very excited on inclusive hiring. There's not a lot. The rest of the council agenda is kind of, I don't want to say that it's tedious next week. There's not a lot going on. I'm very interested to dig into Councillor Wong's notice of motion about protecting trees on private property. I have some questions about it, digging into it, doing some research. My team's working on that a little bit. It's interesting, and I'm looking forward to that conversation. I want to go back to the special meeting of council earlier this week where we talked about the plebiscite. And I've always said that hearing from Calgarians is really important. On an issue like rezoning, hearing people's why is really important to me. And a plebiscite doesn't afford us that opportunity. A plebiscite is a binary yes no question. You want it or you don't. And I think that simplifying it doesn't do us justice in the conversation about, one, why it's being proposed, and two, why people aren't may not be supportive of it, or three, like why people are supportive of it. And this is not an easy decision. It is a complex one that involves a lot of considerations. And so reducing it to the simplicity of a yes no, I actually just doesn't think does the conversation justice. Further, what I would say is that I ask questions. Not everyone can participate in a plebiscite. So a plebiscite is exclusionary by nature. And so just a couple scenarios. You could own a home in the city, but not be a Canadian citizen, but you could still be a homeowner. So this decision could affect you, but you wouldn't have a say in a plebiscite. So now it's exclusionary. You could own a home in the city, but not be a resident of Calgary. So you could be living somewhere else. And might be multiple reasons why you're living somewhere else. Your employment may have taken you somewhere else. So I think about like members of members of the Canadian military. They may be living somewhere else and not be considered a resident of the city simply because they own property. Lots of people work overseas with their various jobs, so they may own property and might not be able to then vote in this plebiscite. And similarly, people who may need homes who also aren't residents, or citizens, I should say, then they are excluded from voting in the plebiscite. So plebiscite doesn't actually capture all the complexity of who might own a house or rent a house, or want to own a house. And so it doesn't actually include everybody, whereas a public hearing doesn't exclude anyone by nature. Obviously, there are challenges with getting to a public hearing for some people, but no one's precluded from sending a letter that can then be on the public record and having their voice submitted that way. I also don't believe in delaying a decision. So the rezoning decision is part of a suite of tools. So it's really, really important that we look at it. We have to look at it individually, but we also have to look at it in the context of a broader systems change. So the housing strategy is a broader systems change. This is one piece of that. And so we have to evaluate it in the context of that as well. And I think that asking us to wait 18 months to see what else is going to happen, I actually don't think that's the solution, or I don't think that's the right move. We know that there are challenges facing us today, and we need to make decisions about it today, because let's say we don't make this decision. So let's say rezoning doesn't pass. We're going to have to look at other parts of the housing strategy to see where we can potentially add more emphasis in order to tackle some of the challenges that we have around housing. So it's important that we make these decisions today so we can react and change other parts of a strategy and a systems thinking and a systems-wide approach to the housing crisis that we are in. So there's also the whole thought of delaying it further down. That just it doesn't align with the importance of the issue that is facing us today. So that's why I didn't support the plebiscite notice of motion. So one, it's exclusionary by nature in terms of who can participate, and two, the decision was too far away for the challenge that we're facing today. So I want to talk a little bit again on citywide rezoning and acknowledging the complexities around there and a lot of the questions. So I said at the beginning, if you're joining a little bit later, on April 8th, I'm going to be hosting a Q&A live with two members of administration. If you want to send your questions ahead of time, you totally can. Ward 11 at calgary.ca. We have a lot of those questions. I'm going to be touching on them a little bit in 15-minute Fridays between now and then. But then we're going to have that more comprehensive conversation on April 8th with two members of administration. So for one from planning, one from the housing strategy team. And we're going to ask each other questions. And then if, depending on how many questions we get ahead of time, we might take some live questions too. So I really want to talk about utility capacity, because it's one that's come up, is whether or not our current existing utility infrastructure. And we're really talking about often water is the big one that comes to mind. So stormwater, and so when you flush your toilet, all of it, even the storm drain, so sanitary stormwater, but then also water in too. Do we have those capacities to take on more population in neighborhoods? So The short answer is yes. The short answer is yes for a couple of reasons. So in most communities, there has been a population decline. So in most established areas, there's been a population decline. But population alone is not the measurement of how we measure our utilities. So utilities is a factor of actually like how much is going in or out of the system. And so population is a factor of that, units is a factor of that, but volume is a factor of that as well. So when you take in the 1950s, when you had high volume, like toilets, right, where you're flushing like 10, 15, 20 liters every toilet flush, and you're now down to 3 to 6 liters per toilet flush, that's, you could have multiple more 3 to 6 liter toilet than you could have a single 20-liter toilet. And so population-wise, low flow faucets, low flow shower heads. So you actually have like less water sometimes going into the system, even though you could have a higher population. So like that's a factor too. It's also a factor that like depending on where that pipe is and the size of that pipe, they can be locally improved to get into the bigger ones. So often when most homes get rebuilt, even a new single which has maybe gone from like a 1950s house where you maybe had maybe two and a half bathrooms to now maybe 4 bathrooms, because you have to have one in your primary bedroom, you have to have one for your upstairs, you got to have one on your main floor, you have to have one in your basement. So you now have gone from a house that already had 2 bathrooms. Now you have 4 bathrooms, even just in a single. Again, they're all lower flow. So again, population or units aren't really the factor. It's actually just about total volume of the system. But often those sanitary tie-ins get fixed at the individual house by house place. It's really the larger projects where then those sanitary upgrades are triggered. So then that's actually work happening in established areas, communities, where we're figuring it out. How do we upgrade sanitary lines, primarily it's sanitary lines, in advance of the developer having to pay for it? And then there's a payback program that exists. So like this was work I was doing prior to getting elected, is figuring out how do we manage utilities through growth and change. So this is a problem, or this is a challenge that we've actually been addressing through the city for like at least 6 to 8 years. And we have a lot of those solutions in place, and we know what is needed to be done. So population density or re-densifying neighborhoods or rezoning neighborhoods alone, and just changing the land use is not going to be a thing that is going to like drastically challenge our utility systems. Our utility systems, if you think a lot of them were operating just fine at peak population with higher volume sort of like input, and they still had capacity at peak volume. So if you had, let's say, or peak populations, if let's say you have a community that at peak population had 5,000 people, right now it has 4,000 people, it still had volume for beyond 5,000 people. So utilities actually, we're okay. So the short answer is like, we're okay. And we will address it on an as-need basis because we have great monitoring systems. So, I will definitely ask this on April 22nd at the rezoning conversation, because these are really important conversations that people are legitimately worried about. And yeah, there are other considerations from an electrical standpoint, which like I think electricity, we know, we've talked to NMAX, the grid, we're doing good. Yeah, we definitely hear around like internet capacity. The city is not solely responsible for those. So we have to kind of figure out how we work with those service providers. So how do we work with Shaw? How do we work with Rogers? Or how do we work with TELUS or whoever? They're all merged together now. So we have to have those conversations too. But you know what? This is also where technology is improving rapidly and supporting us in a really, really good way too. So we're lucky in that sense that like this is coming at a time where we actually have like rapidly pacing technology as well. So those are just a couple notes about rezoning. I'll continue to have this conversation with you. I continue to acknowledge that it is not an easy conversation to have. We are all so attached to our homes for very, very good reasons. These are where we build our memories. These are where we build our families. This is where we build community. We get to know our neighbors. And we put a lot of value into our homes, and because they provide us stability and security and consistency. The flip side of that is what I hear are there are people who are also needing stability and consistency and security, and they are unable to find that, which is why we're in a which is why we're calling it a housing crisis, because that is leading to precarious positions for a number of individuals. And so we are trying to strike that balance on how do we share our communities? How do we share that abundance that some people are afforded right now and other people are not? And we have to wrestle with that conversation about asking people to change what they know to be true, in order to help other people have those same truths, because they're living a different truth right now. And so we are balancing as a council the information and the data that we have, along with those lived experiences and stories that all people hold to be true in themselves. So that's that. I wish you all a happy Friday. It's going to be a warm, wonderful weekend. If you are near or by a storm drain and it is not draining, please give us a hand and help out. If you're uncomfortable doing that, call 311 and our water services team can help. I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Thanks all.